And we are live. Welcome to everybody who's joining us in live time for this event. If you're watching this later, thanks for watching it back. Thanks for joining us. Obviously, you can't give us questions if you're watching this back. Well, you can, but we won't answer them. But if you are watching this live, either via LinkedIn or from pre-registration across X or across YouTube, then by all means fire questions in and we'll do our best to answer those questions throughout the event. My name's Owen Richards. I'm the CEO of Air Marketing and I'm joined by 4 fabulous guests today. I will let them do their introductions in a moment. If you're watching the screen, you can see their names and rather than me list them off, they'll do a little introduction, a bit of background in a short moment. And we are here today to talk about marketing and RevOps are killing your sales performance. Bit controversial, I know. I'm not sure I'm saying that we believe in that necessarily. Perhaps it should have a question mark afterwards. I'm not sure. But we're looking at how to reclaim the KPI crown. We will talk about metrics, whether across sales or marketing. We're a sales audience here on the panel primarily. And what we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years is a lot of change around this new department, which is RevOps coming into things, marketing and sales getting far more aligned in theory. But are there downsides of that? Are there things that are getting in the way? And are we killing the natural sales flair that helps people to be exceptional performers? All things that we're going to explore in this conversation. Before we get into topic though, I'm just going to go around our panel and just get them to give 20, 30 seconds of background about themselves, who they are as an individual, what they do in their organization and what their organization does. And then we'll get stuck right into the conversation straight away. Georgina, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. Would you mind just introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Georgina. I look after all things sales enablement at a business called SEON. We're in the fraud prevention space. Enablement means a lot of different things to different people. But for me in my role, it means helping to make our sales team more effective and efficient from everything from coaching, training, onboarding, learning development, and occasionally having to shout at salespeople for not following process.
It's still there, isn't it? It's still a thing. Thank you so much, Georgina. James, I'll come to you next.
Thanks. I hope you don't shout at me, Georgina. All right, nice to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is James. My company is Clear Sales Message. And what I actually do is help answer exactly this situation right now. When somebody turns to you and says, hey, what do you do? And you have to introduce yourself to a group. That can be quite difficult. So I help companies to simplify and standardize their value proposition. So they're saying the same thing in the same way every single time. It helps with confidence in a selling conversation. It also helps with conversion because we know we're all on the same page.
Love it. Very good indeed. Helen, I'll come to you next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Helen Boothby, and my little business is called Sales Express. I've had 30 years in sales, started many years ago. So went through the usual route: sales manager, sales leader, commercial director. And 4 years ago, I decided to go self-employed just before COVID. Great timing. And ultimately, what I do now is I help businesses grow by growing their people. So that might be strategy, might be consulting, training and coaching, sales leaders, MDs and salespeople. And that's me.
Amazing. And last but not least, Chris.
Yeah, hi all. My name's Chris. I run a company called Sales Psyche, having been in sales for many a year and still count myself as a salesperson. I recognize that mindset and well-being is something that can be quite reactive, that people neglect or don't work on until it's sort of too late or people are struggling. So I now work with companies and salespeople and leaders to create more of a proactive and preventative approach to taking care of the mind and the well-being around it.
Amazing. Well, you're all very welcome. Thank you for joining us and giving your valuable time today. What I will say is I'm not professing to be an expert at this whatsoever, and I don't think any of you guys are, in terms of, you know, we're all coming from slightly different angles. But I think what we are all heavily involved in, or have been, is in getting the best out of sales teams and salespeople, one way, shape or form, whether that be through James and messaging, and Helen through sort of management process, and Chris through well-being and psychology and the mentality behind things, or Georgina through the learning and development and training and giving them the right tools and systems. All of us are involved in getting the best out of salespeople. And I think that's the objective that we're working towards in this conversation is, you know, that's what everybody wants, for each individual salesperson in the team to be achieving their utmost, to be achieving the numbers that we all need to make the business a success. And I guess the question I'm going to start with that in mind is, what are the numbers that you guys look at or see people looking at that are most important for salespeople? What are the metrics or the KPIs outside of revenue, which is lovely, but ultimately we need some leading metrics and KPIs. What are the things that you see either in your business or your clients' businesses that people are leaning on the most and relying on the most? Chris, I might come to you because it might be interesting to just get your take on this, because you work with so many different organizations.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is the metric controllable? Because I think that's the worst thing you can do, is give people metrics that are more of an outcome focused metric rather than the controllable one, which instantly puts someone sort of at a disadvantage and almost gets them to focus on the wrong thing there, and can sometimes create a bit of a fixed mindset rather than the growth mindset. So I think the biggest thing is is this metric you've set in place, first of all, is it controllable? Like, is it down to calls made versus meetings booked, for example? Because, if you're saying this is your metric and we're going to judge you on it, it's like, okay, we're just going to judge you and based on the outcome rather than the process to get there, or focus on how you develop it. So I think that's the biggest thing. First of all, is it controllable? And then also around this is there context around the controllable metric? Like, does someone understand why they're doing what they're doing, why they've been tasked with this? Is it well, this is what looks good for the company, or this is why it's important to us? But if the salesperson doesn't understand it, then, we're intrinsically always asking. We start as children going why to everything, and we still ask that question, maybe sometimes a bit more in a quiet, unconscious manner when we become adults. So I think it's really important to go, have we put a controllable metric in front of this person, and have we given them context as to, first of all, why it's beneficial for them and why we've put this in place?
Yeah, really interesting. So your example there of the metrics that maybe are not as controllable and ones that are. So you're saying that maybe the number of activities is a slightly more controllable thing, because that's a process rather than an outcome. Whereas, the same number of activities might get one meeting on one day and no meetings the next day. And can you influence it? Yeah, but there's also outside influences to that as well.
Yeah, and I think, one thing that I always encourage people to do is, when I'm working with people, whether it's from a metrics or just an individual, is upper and lower boundaries. So rather than going, I'm going to make X amount of calls today, is upper and lower, because the nature of sales is no day is the same. And some days you are going to be swamped with other meetings. You are going to be stuck on the phone with someone. You're like, oh, I didn't make my 50 calls because I got stuck on the call with someone. It's like, well, that's actually a good thing. So why are you punishing someone for it? So actually giving people a range, and also not just focusing on one channel as well, I think is important, because people will be good at different things. And it's not saying that, people should only focus on what they're good at, because you still want to develop them, but you don't just want to go, right, the be all and end all is cold calling. You want to spread it out a bit and encourage like video prospecting, for example, or emails, because you'll have people with different strengths.
Yeah. Helen, I'm gonna come to you if that's okay. Again, you're in other people's businesses, seeing that. You must see some scenarios where there are numbers, targets, KPIs in place that are having a negative impact because they are measuring the wrong thing, or they're creating the wrong behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that point around the behavior is absolutely key. Those KPIs absolutely have to be aligned to what that individual's role is and the behaviors that you want to see from them. So if I can give you an example, I'm working with an organization at the moment and very much focused on meetings made. Now, obviously, I accept that you have to generate new business meetings. But when we looked under the bonnet, what we were looking at was there was a lot of meetings made, but the level of attended of those meetings were very low, and the conversion of those meetings were very low. So for me, that's a really good example where, yeah, activity is important, but it's not the be all and end all. It's about, okay, what's the quality of the conversation, both in terms of with the opportunity that leads to something that is going to get over the line. But also, I think going back to Chris's point, is making sure that they're relevant and that there is some context and conversation around the data. So one of the things that I'm seeing at the moment is probably too much dashboard management in terms of KPIs and not enough engagement around, okay, what's the data telling us? So if I'm seeing somebody with a whole heap of pipeline, and nothing's converting, what is the manager doing to support that individual address those issues? So there's a lot of things that are going on, but I would say relevance, behaviors, and also focusing on the things that matter and having the opportunity to find out the issues behind that data are absolutely essential.
Georgina, coming to you, you're obviously looking at more of an in-house scenario. There must be some key metrics that you would look to when you are trying to understand a salesperson's performance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big things for me is about giving the teams a sense of accountability. I think too often businesses fall into the trap of going, you must make 200 calls a week because I've decided that's the number that works, because that's how it's worked for other people in different companies. And the immediate response from reps is, why? Like that, why? Like, talk to me about it. And you can't defend it because it's just, oh, that's best practice, or oh, it's how it's been done before. And so what I like to do in terms of accountability is say, what do you need to get to? Like, what's the big number? Okay, well, let's work back on your conversion metrics so that you know what the KPIs are that you have to hit in order to get to where you want to be at the end. And ultimately, what that then creates for reps is a sense of their own KPIs that they can talk to their manager about, that their manager has visibility over, that they then feel a sense of ownership to drive towards that end goal. So I think that's kind of one side. I also have the kind of view from an enablement perspective of, I care about things like how quickly can we convert leads? How quickly does it take our team to follow up with an inbound? Do we have everything in the right place? Do we have reps with the knowledge that they need in order to execute effectively? What percentage of their week is having to fill in HubSpot fields versus engaging with our customers? So I care about some slightly different KPIs, but I think from the pure sales ones, it's about giving the team that accountability and flexibility.
Yeah, but I think you make a really sound point there, and James, I will come to you in a moment. Just around that kind of alignment between marketing and sales, and how we've been seeing both of those departments have to evolve their thinking around KPIs that are aligned towards revenue rather than maybe completely segmented. And we'll come back to that if that's okay. James, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on that point around KPIs. Obviously, you're working with sales teams more around messaging and getting that right. But again, that must come up in conversations for you.
It does, and there's something that I recommend all of my clients and students to focus on, and I call it client speed. So understanding from the very first moment you have an interaction with somebody to when they pay you, how long is that? Because most businesses couldn't tell you, not specifically, and that then helps you understand, well, the work I'm doing today is going to better. So my client speed on average is 11 to 12 weeks. So I know if I speak to somebody today, on average, 11 to 12 weeks time, that'll become a client. And that influences the level of activity I do. And it gives me a greater sense of control over what I'm up to. Really easy, obvious thing to track, but I don't see so many people doing it.
Great point. Chris, you've got something to add here, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of, I agree with everyone, what they've said, but to Georgina's point in particular around accountability, I think the more you can put it back to the salesperson, and that comes from coaching and spending time with them, and the more you understand what their goals are and their aspirations, the more you can make it about, well, you told me you wanted to achieve this. So in order to achieve this, here's what it kind of looks like, and holding them to account towards it, rather than going, here's what we have to do is, well, hang on, you said to me, in our weekly meeting or monthly meeting, this is where you want to be within a year. And in order to be able to do that, this is what that kind of looks like. You don't have to do it, but this is what it looks like. So a more sort of in-depth understanding of individuals' goals and what they want to achieve can also help with that accountability piece as well, and drive those kind of behaviors and add context and their own individual why behind it.
Isn't it funny? We all know that, we hear that, but I don't see that practiced anywhere near enough as a management technique. Helen, I think you have something to add as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to reinforce Georgina's point. 100% agree with that. I think where the magic happens is within those quarterly or those monthly reviews, where we are really looking at not only what are the relevant KPIs for that individual that is going to develop them and stretch them and all of those great things, but also that for me isn't rigid. Those KPIs can be changed and amended and revised every quarter based on how that individual is progressing. So 100% agree with that. I also kind of wanted to throw something else in, which is that, of course, we all get focused on metrics. We're in the sales business, right? But I think I've seen some excellent execution of soft KPIs. And what I mean by that is having a KPI as to the number of referrals that you generate a month or a quarter, the number of case studies that you can get from customers over a quarter period. And for me, that really feeds into both ongoing development of your opportunities in your territory, but also supporting the marketing effort and building that collaboration, which for me is an essential part of where sales and marketing really need to focus. So I just wanted to support that point and throw some extra ideas in there.
It's interesting because nothing in life is completely black and white. I would love to see, I fully behind what you said there. I would love to see a performance review with somebody who's on a performance plan because they're not hitting target in terms of meetings booked or revenue, and then put forward something that says, yeah, but I've got all of these extra referrals for marketing, and see a modern sales manager respond to that in a positive way or in a constructive way. But I just don't think people will be brave enough to do that because it's not valued. And I think that's a really valid point. I mean, don't get me wrong, we are measuring things towards revenue, but we are so one-dimensional in the way that we think about this stuff often. We're not able to see the layers underneath it. Chris, you got something else to add on KPIs? Go for it.
Yeah, it was the point that was also made around like best practice. And I think the danger is sometimes when you are seeing people in the business, maybe someone's getting really good at video prospecting, for example, or personalized emails, is then to go, right, let's start targeting this and put a KPI around that. And it's linked to something called the over-justification effect, which is if someone is intrinsically motivated by something and you put an extrinsic motivator on it, they will actually enjoy it less. They'll find it more sort of difficult and more of a task around it. So it's being very careful with those kind of behaviors. It's a bit like when people start a passion and then they start maybe putting a bit more of a business mindset around it, they can enjoy it less. Or you'll have some people in the team that will do things for the enjoyment from it versus the individuals from an extrinsic point of view who want to be how it's seen. So it's just being very cautious to, yes, you want to take best practice and see what's working within the team, but don't just instantly think we need to target everyone on this, because those individuals will probably start losing the enjoyment and motivation.
Brilliant. James, I'm going to come to you. Just on the Helen talked about those sort of soft KPIs and sort of case studies and client stories and reviews. I'm guessing that feeds into your area. You might have a couple of points on that.
Yeah, so it's interesting for me because the people that know me know I'm obsessed. I was obsessed for the longest time with trying to hit 500 LinkedIn recommendations. It took me 6 years to do it, but I eventually got there. But as a KPI, I think it's a really important one because so many businesses don't really kind of routinize actually getting feedback, getting case studies. And a thing that I found that worked for me, I kind of found out by accident, but I realized retrospectively why it works. So when I first started out, my goal was to hit 50 LinkedIn recommendations. And I realized that because I'm actively sharing the goal with my clients, I've done good work for them, so hopefully they want to reciprocate. But because I share the goal, there is a negative consequence to them kind of not helping me out, and they know I'm watching that number. Whereas if I just said, hey, Owen, could you do that? Yeah, sure, I'll get to that. And you're busy and you don't. If I said, like, I'm at 36, I'm trying to hit 50. Could you help me, Owen? I'd really appreciate it. You're more inclined to do it. And it's something I share with all of my clients and students, and it really works. And it's, I'm at like 539 at the moment. My target's now 1,000, so everybody laughs at me. But sharing your target, your goal for that, you're not going to share a financial goal. People don't necessarily want to help you. But if you share a KPI like that, case studies, reviews, if you've done good work, they want to reciprocate, and it works really well.
Interesting. Helen, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just on James's point, I think one of the challenges that I've seen both as a sales leader and as supporting clients is that there's a bit of a myth that case studies are created by marketing. I actually don't agree with that. I feel that the ownership sits with the salesperson, and if it helps us build our marketing collateral and it helps us build our relationship with marketing, that's a really good thing, right? But also what I think a lot of salespeople don't necessarily grasp is we're getting a case study or a referral from a client. What we're just doing is we're getting that public declaration that that client is really enjoying working with us, and that becomes a little bit of glue to build and strengthen that relationship as we go forward. So I'm a big advocate of doing things that are off your own bat, even if they're not a KPI in your organization. Set some of these measures, because you'll get some really good outcomes, and those relationships will strengthen both internally and also with the clients themselves.
Yeah, fantastic point. And look, guys, thank you for all your contributions on that. If you are watching this live, I know that nobody really dials into live events anymore. They tend to just wait to the recording or watch it in their own time. But we have had a good couple of dozen at least people log in and watch this live already. We're only a part of the way through, and that number will continue to tick up. But please do fire questions in if you'd like me to fire them at the panel. I'm going to move us on a little bit because we talked about KPIs, and I'm just going to move us on to the next stage of discussion around that, which is, where can KPIs be a problem? Where can they actually have a negative impact? And Chris, you kind of touched on this around the controllable piece at an individual level, and I think that's a fantastic example. I'm going to share my own example, which I've shared with you guys offline before, which is a real life scenario with one of our clients who had very fortunate position of having 6,000 MQLs. Now, what's an MQL, you ask? A marketing qualified lead, but it's different in every organization. What level of qualification? How do they do that? So in this case, in real terms, it was people that had consumed some content, who had gone through a gated process to consume content, and it was deemed to be that these people were therefore worthy of salespeople's time and focus. And Georgina, to tap into a point that you made, there was a rule that they needed to be spoken to quickly. Right? Absolutely, there was a KPI around that. There was a KPI around what percentage of those MQLs after download was spoken to or phoned, or there was an attempt to speak to them within a period of time. And that was dominating the need for the sales team to do that job. And that was the tone or the strategy behind sales. What we learned very quickly over a 6-month period actually was that the sales team could have a better outcome phoning cold data that they'd never spoken to before than phoning these MQLs. Why? Because the qualification metrics weren't right. In those 6,000, there were probably somewhere between 60 and 120, 1 or 2% in the maths, that were actually the right kind of profile and persona. The fact that they'd engaged with content wasn't enough. The fact that they were interested in the brand didn't mean that they were a buyer, didn't mean that they owned a budget, didn't mean that they had a problem that they could solve. It just meant they were interested in the content because they produced really good content. And that was a very different thing. Yet this organization had lots of salaries focused on trying to meet that KPI. We must talk to as many as possible, as quickly as possible, because we think we're going to convert opportunities. And I always use that example because it's a great example of where marketing and sales just aren't aligned. Marketing were being rewarded financially for hitting KPIs and numbers on a quantity of MQL. Sales were being remunerated based on revenue performance or qualified meetings booked off the back of those MQLs. And if you put the leaders of both of those two departments in a room, they did not agree on what good looked like whatsoever. And I think that's always a fantastic, really easy to understand example of where KPIs go wrong. If you don't have an aligned KPI, if you don't have KPIs that everyone understands what good looks like, and if they don't attach into each other, they can often break the next step without intending to do that. And I just wonder whether any of you, and James, I can see your note and you've got a point on this, so I'll come to you first if you're happy. Maybe you've got some examples and some comments around where KPIs can really break things, albeit without the intention to do so.
Yeah, reminds me of a story. So many years ago, back when I had a real job, I used to supply, it was a B2B2C kind of setup. We were supplying company, they were supplying consumers. And a guy called Chris worked at this company. He would send me an email and then he would immediately call me and talk me through the email. And he did it every single time. And I questioned him after about the 5th or 6th time it happened. He said, well, I get targeted in the amount of time I spend on the phone. So essentially, people just game and bastardize the system to try and hit the KPI, and it's completely out of alignment. And also, he was damaging our relationship because I'm now wasting my time listening to him on the phone because he feels like
repeat his email.
Yeah, literally repeat his email. He was a nice guy, but like literally repeat his email. Like, this is not what you should be doing, I don't think, buddy. But yeah, crazy.
Wow. Yeah, and you think that's you, one person. If he's working 230 work days a year and doing that with 10 prospects a day, that's happening nearly 2,500 times a year. You know, that's a hell of a lot of wasted time, isn't it?
Yeah, and also you're damaging those relationships with those people because you're annoying them by wasting their time too. I'm not targeted on the phone. I was targeted to sell stuff. That's it.
Georgina, I come to you.
Yeah, it's bringing me back to my days as an SDR, where there happened to be 4 numbers attached to one contact in the CRM, and guaranteed every single one of those numbers were being called every day, just in the hope that I could get through to maybe one of them, even though I knew none of them worked. If any of my old bosses are listening, I'm very sorry. So I think just throwing myself under a bus there. I think for me, the big thing is KPIs don't work when they're either a vanity metric or the only purpose in them is to beat salespeople over the head with them. If people, to Chris's point earlier, if people don't understand the context behind them, why are we doing them? And if they're a vanity metric, just to be able to go, look how good we are, like look at this number, like didn't we do well? We always teach salespeople like the so what, like the what's in it for me. If we're not using the same theory behind the things that we're measuring and the things that we're talking to people about, people don't care about them. People see them as admin, they see them as a big brother measuring tool, they see them as just something I have to tick off because I have to do it. And so if they don't, Owen, to your point, if they don't connect into one another, it doesn't make any sense. I also think they don't work when the number is set at the beginning and there's no fluidity into it. So we had a case recently where our one of our metrics, we ended up getting 200% month on month for a good 3 or 4 months. And I was like, oh, we're doing really well. And I was sitting there going, don't want to put a downer on this, but have we considered that maybe we're not looking at the right number, or maybe we're measuring the wrong thing, or maybe we have the wrong target? Because then it just becomes a vanity metric. If that is off, then our conversion's off, everything just doesn't feel right. And then all we're doing is measuring for measuring's sake. And I don't think that's helpful or constructive.
Yeah, it's a really valid point. Kat, thank you so much for your comments. We've got a live watch here saying some really good takeaways and refreshing. The mindset's changing to meet and reflect, I guess, what's going on in the business. Appreciate you tuning in, appreciate your comments. And if you've got any questions, then I'm really happy to fire them at these guys. Chris, do you want to add on this?
Yeah, I think there's 2 or 3, the kind of negative side of it. To pick your example for the MQL situation, I think 2 or 3 things can happen here. One, you can start creating a bit of self-doubt in salespeople as well. If they're like, hang on, you should be, these are leads and you're not closing them, it is your fault. Or the belief can become, maybe there's something wrong with me. You know, if I said, oh, Owen, you're going to make 100 calls, then everyone should pick up. As soon as someone doesn't, you think, oh, something's wrong with me. You don't think necessarily, if you just stepped into sales, for example, you would think, well, am I the issue? Like, am I the problem here? Which then can influence that. I think there's a level of resentment sometimes that can come in here of almost going, again, beating me over the head with this, like a resentment towards the company of, hang on, I know what you're doing here. You're saying you're giving me leads, but they're not really any qualified leads to my sort of what I would define as. And the third thing it links to is the opposite of the placebo effect, the nocebo effect. So it's actually going in, and if you start to believe something's going to be a negative situation or have a negative connotation of it, you'll actually go in with less self-belief, less confidence, and find it more difficult to deal with. So if you start to have a certain connotation, which I've seen with companies and during my time as a sales coach as well, where you believe certain leads are bad leads, you then go in and don't treat them with the same respect. And not saying that it would come out any different, but you can almost create a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy there where you almost don't push back or you don't drill in the same way you would. So you almost create that even bigger story around it, and then being bad leads altogether when some might still be decent.
Yeah, valid point, Chris. Helen.
Yeah, I just wanted to reference that I've seen lots of that stuff going on in terms of that disconnect between the marketing output and the sales output input. I've actually been working with a client quite recently. It's been very controversial, but it's working in terms of making sure that there are aligned KPIs between sales and marketing. And so they threw the rule book out, and ultimately the marketing team are now measured on meetings that are well qualified, opportunities that move into pipeline, and also conversions themselves. So a lot of reluctance from the marketing team, but so many years of spending loads of money, not really getting what they needed from it. And that has transformed the relationships between the sales and marketing, which is quite unusual, really. And the other thing as well, which I'm a big supporter of, is firstly for the salespeople to be proactive with marketing. in terms of where are the sectors that they really want to focus on, be it reactivating lapsed accounts or new market sectors, etc. But specifically with regard to creating a shared marketing plan, sales marketing plan. So, for example, there may be 4 major keynote events within that organization that they're inviting clients to, all pushed out through marketing. The salespeople are then generating the attendance of those events, and they're actually captured as meetings. So you've got a KPI being hit to drive that engagement and the conversation, and you've also got a KPI that relates to the marketing activity itself. And personally, I would like to see more of that stuff within organizations, because I think that they're missing a trick, to be honest, if we're not looking at how we're collaborating on that shared strategy.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because Chris, you were talking earlier about that kind of control piece, and I apologies for anyone who doesn't give a damn about sport, but I'm a killer for a sport analogy, and I always think about a sporting team, whatever. Pick the sport that you like, right? I'm going to talk about football in this scenario. Somebody plays in goal and somebody plays up front. You lose a game together, you win a game together, right? The goalkeeper doesn't go up and try to score goals all the time, and the striker doesn't try to go in goal to save them. That's not the way it works. You have a role and you play that role, but ultimately it needs everybody doing their job to win. And I think there's that element of when you join a team that has a shared goal, you accept the flaws in accountability. You accept that it's not your job to score, but actually we all contributed to that and we're prepared to lose. So I'm prepared to be held accountable for working in marketing, delivering number of leads, a quality of lead, and that not turning into revenue. It may not be that the failure was primarily in my area of the business, but I also know there's things that I could have done better to support that, and maybe would have had a better chance of winning. And so awareness of wider KPIs and that sort of shared accountability, if understood well, can be really powerful versus well, that's not my problem. I hit my marketing numbers. We got the qualified leads over. We gave them 1,000 this month. They didn't convert them, so it's a sales problem, which can be fairly damning. But I guess, Chris, I'm just interested in your take on that, because of course that then potentially puts a KPI over your head that you do not have control of, and I'm guessing you would argue there's also a negative impact to that as well.
Well, I think it's also the most important thing, aside from focusing on what you can control, is looking at the controllable within the uncontrollable. So sometimes it's most accepting what you can't control. And that's a big part of that as well, is that, I work with some sales reps that are like, I don't quite understand the context as to why this KPI has been put in. And you can voice it, but it's still there. So you can control, you can have a conversation, but to a certain degree, it's there. And you might have other things you think that work. So you're like, okay, well, what can I control in this? Because too many times salespeople sometimes just focus all their time and energy on the thing they can't control, create more stress and frustration around it, a sense of injustice around it. And 2 things can be true at once. You can think maybe this isn't fair, this isn't right, or this is linked to something called egocentric thinking, which is where we all have a set of values and behaviors that we live by, and we expect everyone else to be the same. So you might be like, well, if I was a leader or a manager, I would never put a KPI like that in place. So then you expect everyone else to be the same around it. So I think it's also quantifying as well. Sometimes just accepting what you can't control is just as important within sales, because there is so much of it. I always say, like, the sooner you accept a wall is a wall, the less time and energy you spend trying to push it over. You look at Google Maps, for example, you might think, this would only take me 10 minutes. I've got to go that way for 30. Well, the longer you dwell on that, the less likely you are to get moving. So I think there is also an aspect here where it is also accepting what you can't control.
Yeah, really, really good point. James, I want to come to you on something, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So we often look at numbers, right? We look at numbers. We look at how many conversations have you had? How many phone calls have you made? How many emails have we had? Your area of expertise is messaging, right? It's how do we say it well? What's the quality of that engagement? What's the quality of that conversation? How on earth do you measure that? What kind of numbers or measurement? Because surely that's more important, right? If I have 10, I think we would all argue this, if I have 10 exceptionally well-structured, clearly messaged, confident, assertive conversations versus 100 where I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, I think we'd all gamble on the one that knew what they were talking about and had a really well-structured message to get a better outcome if you repeated that time and time again. But can we measure that?
Yeah, you can absolutely measure it. I mean, at the highest level, it's measured in conversion. At the lowest level, it's measured in literally the number of conversations you're having, because it's incredible how many people you'll speak to who just patently won't understand your offering, but won't actually ask. So when I'm selling Clear Sales Message to my clients, I kind of use this analogy of the next 10 conversations you have, 2 or 3 out of those 10 people are now actually going to understand what you're selling, and that's going to drive things forward. On a granular level, the actual duration of the sales calls and the sales meetings. I worked with a B2B SaaS company very recently, and they're recording internally, like the moment when the client actually gets it on the call. It's obviously an informal kind of soft KPI, but they used to spend kind of 30 minutes of a 45-minute call for the client to actually really understand, okay, now I get it. Great, now tell me the details. They're getting that in like minute 6 or 7 now. So there's lots of different measurements, but it comes down to ultimately just pure conversion. One of my main mantras is, if they don't understand it, they can't buy it, which sounds really flippant and obvious, but it's true. And I meet so many businesses, whether it's a technical offering or whether it's kind of a wide-ranging, vast offering, you've got a very little amount of time. It's a bit like at the start of something like this: introduce yourself, talk to us about yourself. What you say counts, and most people literally don't know what to say, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And can't tell you how many times over the years I've gone to somebody's website, read the opening blurb, and it says, "We are corporate integrators of so-and-so strategy." I have got no idea what you do whatsoever. And then that becomes a cultural thing in every sales conversation throughout the organization. I think that's a fantastic point. Helen, I think you wanted to just talk about the conversion plan for sellers.
Sorry, just need to unmute. Yeah, just on the conversion. Again, it may align to KPIs, or it might be your own KPIs that you're setting. But I'm a very, very big believer in creating your own backward plan. I've done it as a salesperson. I've done it as a sales leader. I've encouraged, I've coached my people to work through the numbers. So going back to what James was saying in terms of, okay, well, what is the conversion? Because that ultimately is what we're looking at. What I would be encouraging any salesperson or sales manager to do, if they aren't already, is actually looking at, okay, in order for me to get that to that number, then let's actually review my performance over the last quarter or the last month. What's the number of deals that I need to get in that period at what average order value? What's my conversion ratio? So therefore, how many deals are moving into pipeline, and what's my conversion ratio to get that average order value and to get that number of deals I want? What's the number of qualified leads that I'm generating that then convert into an opportunity that then feeds into my pipeline? So for example, just keeping it really high level, if I had a target of 60K across a quarter, for example, it might be, if I work on the basis that I've got a conversion of 50% on everything of those things I'm talking about, I might be looking at 12 deals at 5K. I might be then looking at 24 opportunities that I need to move through to pipeline to convert 1 in 2, number of qualified opportunities that are coming off qualified meetings, etc., etc. So I just think that every salesperson needs to know their numbers, and that's not a KPI. That's you just understanding where you are right now and what everything I need to do to get to that outcome. And I guess it also fits into what Chris was saying, because that's a controllable. Once I know what those numbers are, I know where I need to focus. So I just wanted to reference that conversion is everything, but having your own backward plan to support how you're going to deliver on that.
Yeah, love that. Georgina, I'll come to you. I always know when we're on a topic that people like, because I started getting, in the background, we've got messaging and everyone says, can I add something to this? Georgina, you're up first, then we'll go to James, then we'll go to Chris on this point.
Appreciate it, thank you. I think just to build on what Helen said, so we call that sales maths. We do it with the team at the beginning of every quarter. We have a wonderfully elegant Google slide that the team walk through and then present back. But actually a really interesting thing that we've started doing is, so historically as a business, we've been very inbound led. We've been very inbound heavy, and we're now moving to a much more outbound motion. And one of the really interesting things that we've started doing is basing that entire sales maths on outbound, as if you would never get another inbound coming in your quarter at all. And to Chris's point, that's because it's in the controllables. So it gives the team that accountability to, if I do this, then this will get me or should get me to my number. And if I get inbounds come in, or I get some support with marketing on an event, or who knows what might happen, somebody from the deepest, darkest depths of last quarter comes back and decides they're ready to buy, that's a lovely kind of cherry on top, an added bonus. And I know that I'll get a bit of a top up. But for us, it's what KPIs are you setting yourself based on what you can control purely within your control, without even considering inbound. And then inbound comes in as a benefit on top, which we've also found has strengthened the relationship with marketing, because the team are now going, okay, well, actually, I really want those inbounds to come in to help support, because sometimes they look at the numbers and go, that's quite a lot of activity I've got to do this quarter to hit my number. And so we found that's kind of strengthened that relationship as well.
That's a really valid point. Yeah, the marketing team become the heroes and positive contributor rather than the people that are stopping you getting somewhere. James.
Yeah, to Helen's point, so once you've got your sales math sorted out and you're working backwards, etc., on a macro level, that all makes perfect sense and it works really well. On a kind of every day-to-day level, if I'm sat here and I've got to make some calls and send some emails and follow some people up, and sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming. Chris, you'll probably chime in on that. You know, the psychology, I was like, what do I do first? Where do I put my attention? So if my clients and students, I'd simply have QRM. Quickest route to money. What's the quickest route to money right now? Is it sending those emails, calling those people, commenting on link, whatever? What's the quickest route to money? Because that in the moment helps me to prioritize and hopefully just beat a bit of the overwhelm, because there's a lot to do.
QRM, love it, absolutely love it. Chris?
Yeah, it links to Helen's point around working backwards, and the thing I mentioned earlier on around getting clear on what the reps' goals are to drive that accountability. And I use a little sort of analogy here. You know, we've all sort of walked past those building sites, particularly being from London myself and seeing something every day and always wonder what that is. So there's this person walking past a building site one day and they get curious and go, well, what's going on here? So they ask the first person they see, and he says, what are you doing? They say, well, I'm laying bricks. And he thinks, well, that's not really told me anything. I'm going to go and ask the next person. The next person says, I'm building a wall. And again, thinking this is some sort of joke, walks a bit further up, speaks to the next person who says, we're building a hospital. Now, the question I ask reps or people when I do that, and I'm not going to do the same with you all here, but which of those is most important? And the trick question is that they all are. They're all just as important. And I think it's very easy to get lost in one of those, you know, particularly with this big KPI or these big targets, your hospital, or even not even that being the hospital, it's something bigger than that. You kind of, it can be overwhelming to think, oh God, there's this messy building site and I've got to build this. Or you get so wrapped up in the hospital, you don't really focus on the small stuff. Or you look at a brick and go, how is that going to build a hospital, and forget the walls in between. So it is really understanding that hospital, and my work when I do with reps is have more than one hospital. Don't just make it about work either, because that's where burnout can happen and imposter syndrome and tying all your self-worth and identity, but make it something bigger than what you're trying to work towards here, than the numbers on a page or just metrics as to what this is going to achieve. Have those walls. So, okay, if that's my goal, then within 3 months from now, where do I want to be? Or people say to me, I want to hit the ground running. What does that look like? What does that feel like? How do you know when that's happening other than the numbers? How do you know when that's happening when you haven't hit the numbers yet, when you're ramping up, when you don't have those clear metrics? Like, to actually be able to recognize that, and from a leadership perspective also recognize how to encourage people to focus on not just the tangible things as well, but also those behaviors, to Helen's point earlier on. And then the bricks, like, what are your daily habits? Because if you boil it all back to that goes back to the controllable things and going, right, if I keep doing these things, I have the way to measure myself along the way to know I'm on the right path, and then I know that will lead to this end result.
Yeah, and I think that those numbers and breaking things down, whether it be in numbers or bricks and process, is important in many ways. You say to somebody, go get me 10 meetings. Well, how on earth do I do that? We as the leaders need to be guiding and say, well, if you do these things, these tend to turn into conversations. And these conversations, X number of them are likely to turn into a meeting because we're going to qualify some. So mapping out the process and the numbers is important, because just giving people the end goal means they don't know where to start. And I think it's a valid point. Helen, Georgina, Helen, I'll come to you quickly, Georgina, and then I need to move us on to one more topic, if that's okay. So Helen, quickly, and then Georgina, if that's okay.
Yeah, so just referencing the psychology of KPIs for me is important. I mean, I started my career a million years ago, where in truth, my only KPI other than my target was 3 lunches a week. And that was a given. And whilst my waistline got bigger, my pay packet definitely didn't, because I wasn't getting the direction and the support. And I think just playing back to Chris's point, for me, I would even argue that should we call them KPIs? I like to call them the MITs, the most important things that you can do to get success and deliver, and all of the things that you're motivated by. But it's not one dimensional. It has to be supported with the coach, the manager, the mentor, in terms of, okay, well, what does that really mean? And I guess it always comes back to me is that data remains data and nothing else, unless there's context and quality conversation around it. So that for me is a critical point for any new manager taking on a sales team.
Georgina.
I think to kind of, I guess, to touch on things that everybody said, but briefly, I think whilst we say to give the team and the kind of the importance of giving team flexibility and being able to set their own KPIs and have their own control, I think it's also really important to remember that at the kind of the top level of this, we have a manager that has to track things and has to be able to report on things. And so whilst I'm a big proponent for giving the team flexibility and telling me what they need to do, it's within a set of guidelines. So it's you tell me how many activities you need to do. It's not you tell me which KPIs you want to do that you've plucked from the back of your head somewhere in the world. Because I know that the managers that I work with still have to report on that, to measure it, to have some form of way of looking at it. So it's within a framework.
Yeah, very, very valid point. Chris, last point. I've seen your comment. One last addition before we move on.
Yeah, I think it's just the context around it. The danger is you give people the numbers and people do it and they think, well, I made 50 calls and I didn't get a response. But
it didn't work.
What you do on there. Yeah, after 5 calls, if you're telling yourself this isn't going to work, then you could be like, and that's what then creates that feeling of, well, hang on, I'm making 50 calls, they're making 50 calls. What's wrong? Maybe it's the leads, maybe it's all these other things. When actually it can be the kind of psychology and mindset that's going on. So the danger is just going, here's a KPI, go and hit it, and not actually going, well, hang on, we're in charge and responsible. We're not in charge. We're responsible and accountable for ourselves to support this person, to have the best practice, not just for here's how long to call for, here's who to call, here's how to engage with people, but the kind of deeper stuff behind it.
And it's interesting because this is where that one-dimensional thing I talk about becomes really dangerous, because actually what we as the sales leaders have a responsibility to do is to help people interpret the KPIs, but also understand what else influences the outcome, because it's not just doing the activity. So, James, earlier back to the question I asked you, good coaches are listening to calls, right? And they're helping to identify, well, where did you lose that one? Where was your messaging maybe a bit ambiguous? Where did you miss good discovery questions? What kind of things could you have asked them to bring them into the conversation more? Because 50 conversations with one person and 50 conversations with another are not the same and do not produce the same outcome. It is only part of the process, and you can get to the same outcome with 30 conversations as somebody else can with 50. And how do we teach you to do that, to get better at the same time, so that the KPIs become less important? And we talk about the process of diagnosis. When something isn't working internally, we start at the beginning and work through. Is the activity there? Because if it isn't there, that's step number one, right? If we're not making any calls, we will get a 0 outcome, full stop. Or sending any emails. Then it's, have they resulted in conversation? Have we actually connected, or are we just blindly making phone calls and not speaking to anybody? And then it's like, well, what are we saying on those calls? And is that being received well? Do people understand it? What questions are we asking? Where are we getting stopped in the conversation? And then we can diagnose, is it in the conversation, or is it that we're getting meetings and they're not attending? So we just kind of work chronologically through the process to try and diagnose where the problem is, because everything has quality and it can't be measured in numbers all the time. Sometimes it's measured in emotion or feeling or interpretation or just sheer listening to the conversation. I think that's where it's like, we cannot just set people up and give them KPIs and hope for the best. And that leads me, I've segued myself accidentally into my point here around RevOps, right? So the rise of RevOps. 10 years ago, if I'd have said to you guys, what's RevOps? You'd have gone, huh? Now we all know that RevOps is a department. There's a head of RevOps, there's a RevOps manager, there's a RevOps lead, or whatever it might be in lots of organizations. And what we're seeing is these decisions be managed from a central function, many of whom have never actually sold themselves or worked in marketing or had a KPI themselves in their lives. But because they're technical and they understand sales technology and they understand data, they are able to pull out these lovely dashboards. Helen, back to your point, dashboards for dashboard's sake, and they're able to set the cadence. So salespeople should phone people on day one, and they should say this, and that should be the script. And then on day two, they send this templated email. And I've seen a lot of scenarios where salespeople have lost their flair. They are not allowed to go and do what it is that makes them brilliant, which is go and choose what to say to people and to read the situation and to make decisions. The autonomy, the ability to be different from other people selling and to stand out has all but gone. And it's really, in some cases, holding people back. And I always use the example of, I spoke to the best salesperson in one person's team when they were significantly above everyone else in the team. And I said, what's helping you? Why are you performing at the level? And he said to me, because I don't follow the process. I don't follow the process. And that is a problem, right? Because we've now got people who don't understand it, who are managing things through data in the background, dashboards, processes, layering in 5 new sales technologies at the same time. And salespeople can't have conversations anymore because they're too busy following the process and trying to work out how on earth the technology works. We've only got 10 minutes to touch on it. I've opened a can of worms. I am fully aware. James, I'm sure you'll have a comment on this, so I'll come to you first.
Any comments with it? It's that famous quote. It's Mike Tyson's. Everybody's got a plan, so they get punched in the face. Yeah. So sitting in RevOps, it's like with business plans, isn't it? On paper, all going to be bajillionaires by Friday. Awesome. Anybody can work things out and use arbitrary numbers. But your purpose as a salesperson is to connect with other human beings and people and interface the bits that machines can't interface. So I get the need for standardizing that and trying to control it, but you end up imprisoning people. And it's same in my role. In my previous job, there was a team of 8 of us. One guy who was like way above me, then there was me, then everybody else was way below me. He was maverick. So it was like, we did things our own way. We didn't break the rules, but we certainly didn't follow what we were supposed to do, because on paper it might have worked. In reality, it just definitely wouldn't. There's no theory in selling, right? It's all about practical, what works, what doesn't, using your intonation, using your kind of emotional reading abilities. You can't put that in a spreadsheet, unfortunately.
No, you definitely can't. Well, yeah, you can, but how do you interpret that data? And I think the point here is that, you kind of said it there. What I do want to know is if I phone somebody at 10 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when have I got a better chance of that person answering the phone, right? And if I can manipulate productivity metrics in order to get more conversations, to get more replies, like subject lines in emails, A/B testing, this subject line does get a higher open rate, and it's clear time after time that it does, then absolutely, if we leverage those learnings that come through data and insight, then I can get I can get more conversations. But it doesn't stop the fact that if that conversation is not unique to the salesperson, natural to them, comfortable, if they're not able to read the situation, if they're not able to break the process or system because they see an opportunity, then we all become robots and we lose that natural sales fit. And then does anyone want to work in sales, or do they just want to follow the process? And I just think it's a really, really interesting point there, James. Did you want to add something else? Yeah, it's just one thing. So if you think about it, it's essentially the equivalent of like in-person spamming, isn't it? If we're all following the same process and doing the same thing, it just doesn't work. You can feel and when somebody sent you a templatized email, or they're just following a process, or they're reading a script, because they're just not there. So RevOps is almost just like this weird kind of spamming unit where we just, if everybody says the same thing and does the same thing, it will work. I mean, saying the same thing is important for me in the stuff that I do, but I don't give people scripts. I create structures and frameworks that they can use, but they can put their own personality into it. So I can literally feel like you're hearing the conversation, and you don't have to go, oh, okay, Owen, so yeah, this is why you should buy from me. And I know you're reading something, and I know you're not there. It should come from the heart, and you should have the freedom to make it your own, but you're still going to hit the same 3 key points that you need to. Yeah. Georgina, in your team, do you have tech? Like, I'm guessing the guys are armed with some tools and some technology to get them going and some process, but do you have the ability for them to flex and interpret and kind of do their own thing around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the team are probably fed up of me saying repeatedly, I'm never going to give you a script. Like, ask me for a script and I will still say no. My methodology with the team and the way that I work from an enablement perspective is I give you the story. I give you the story and I give you the outcomes. And how you get there, I don't really mind as long as you get there. Like, work out what's comfortable. if I tell you how to pitch this, it's going to sound like me and you're going to sound like a robot, and that's not successful for anyone. However, for us to have a scalable, repeatable, predictable business, we all need to follow the same story and all work towards the same outcomes. So there has to be an element of, I hate to use the word process because it isn't necessarily, but kind of overarching methodology. We for example do phases, not meetings. So complete the outcomes in your phase and then move on, rather than do your meeting and say it's done. It's putting in place those structures that the team then have autonomy within them to have that flair, without giving them the full flexibility, as some salespeople have a tendency to do, of going, yeah, I know everything, I'm just going to, don't even worry about it. HubSpot, what's HubSpot? Don't need it. Kind of giving them the framework to work within to have that flexibility and flair.
Chris, Helen, anything? Chris, I'll bring you on if that's okay. Have you got anything to add on this? We're kind of nearing the end of our event now, but we've got a few minutes left. So let yourself and Helen just have a contribution to this topic if you've got something to add.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. When I look at this, I almost imagine it, you know, like if you look at some of the best films that are ever made, yes, there's a script, there's an idea, but if you look at the director doesn't go on set and go, right, you have to say it like this. They trust the actor to go, or actress to go, I know you're going to bring your flair to this. Otherwise, what's the point of hiring that person? If you look at some of one of my scenes, I always think about this, is like the Dark Knight, for example, Heath Ledger, when he's got the explosive, the thing, and it's not going off. That was actually real. It was meant to go off, and he's sort of still playing a character, still going, blows it up, and then just acts. And that's just all like improv. That's not down to a director. And that is one of probably the most memorable scenes in that film. And I think the problem, if you become too process driven, is you lose that flair, you lose that sort of memorability almost as well, and you don't stick out, because then you become just noise in the kind of like sea. If everyone else is doing the same thing, you know, we've got this our ANS, or automatic nervous system, is looking for at all points like pattern interrupts. So it's why sometimes you might forget to you've locked your door, or, you know, when you step out for the day and you have to go back, is that INS is sort of just like, it just blends into things. So it's why when people talk about pattern interrupts, it's interrupting your brain, because if your brain just gets too familiar with something, and if everyone's doing the same thing, then you're not going to stand out. You'll blend in. It'll also be less enjoyable for the salesperson. Like, let's not forget, we do get into sales because we want to enjoy it as well. And that's the point. Like, you should find enjoyment in what you do. Otherwise, why are you doing it? It becomes quite monotonous if you lose that. And then I think also you become static. If you're just doing the same thing all the time and you're not bringing in that flair, you're not bringing in new ways to do things. And the beauty of sales is that someone on day one, fresh out of uni or graduation or whatever it might be, can come in and go, I've got an idea. And actually everyone go, great, that works. But if you've got too much of a stringent approach, you lose that.
Brilliant. Helen?
I think everything's been said, really. Technology for me should be an enabler. My worry is that it's disabling, disempowering some great salespeople. So I'm all for having frameworks and structures to support, but it's like you go into a meeting, you're qualifying, you're in that discovery stage, but you're not robotic. It's a conversation. And so if I take that approach and I think, right, well, going back to what James was saying, you know, if you're a salesperson, use that technology to support you, but don't get wrapped up in process, because all the best salesperson people I've come across are natural mavericks anyway, very entrepreneurial, and they know how to get there. So use the tools, but don't obsess about it, would be my view.
Yeah, really, really good advice to wrap us up. Look, thank you all four of you for your points and comments. It's been fantastic hearing your ideas and your commentary around this, and you've all made some brilliant points. I really appreciate you giving up your time to help our audience learn and take value from your experience. Just last opportunity for each of you. If you could just tell me really quickly who your organization can help and how people can get in touch with you if they want to do that. I think it's a nice opportunity. If people have heard, please connect with the guys on LinkedIn, reach out to them directly if you want to. It'd be lovely to if you've got value, connect with the people that have been on the panel. Helen, I'll come to you first. Who does Sales Express help, and how can people get in touch with you?
Anybody in the sales industry, in summary, anything that's in the B2B sales area. So whether you're a MD, commercial director, SD, looking to do some development for your team, or have somebody support you on strategy, or in fact coaching, then just contact me via LinkedIn. I'm a very small little business. But you'll find me on LinkedIn, and very much focused on helping organizations grow through growing their people. So that's me.
Amazing. Chris?
Yeah, any salespeople, leaders, whether that's from a team perspective, individual perspective, if you feel like you want to not only work on your mindset and well-being, whether that be around your self-talk, how you manage, James mentioned overwhelm and stress, dealing with things like imposter syndrome or burnout, any of those things, not just in a reactive way, but proactively working on it, then that would be my bag, I'd say. So you can connect to me on LinkedIn. If you type my name in Google, the famous Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield comes up, so just be careful on that. I get tagged in LinkedIn once a month as him by mistake. And you can find me Sales Psyche, which is psyche.co.uk.
Brilliant. Off to space. James, coming to you.
My namesake is Iggy Pop, so there you go. His real name is James Newell Osterberg, so there you go. But I don't get tagged on LinkedIn. So my website is clearsalesmessage.com, so people can find me there. I typically work with B2B SaaS companies, B2B service companies. The main trigger point, the thing for me is if you have a complicated or difficult to explain offering, that's a real indicator that you need a clear sales message.
Love it. And Georgina, as somebody who's not quota carrying or trying to sell your own services, let's test your messaging, shall we?
God, this is the most pressure I felt under all day. No, I'm on LinkedIn. Always happy to chat through anything enablement, training, coaching. And if you do happen to be an online business looking to protect yourself from fraud, then SEON's the company for you. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out anytime.
Very well done. I'm impressed. Thank you very much for all of you. Have a good rest of your day. I appreciate your time, and yeah, look, really grateful for your input.
Thanks for having us, Owen.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Owen. Thanks all.